4 of Model 5 about road users. In this section, we have already discussed about what safe users as an introduction session. The second session was about vulnerability of road users. The third was about education, and now we are going to focus on enforcement. In the first part, we will describe the different components of enforcement. Secondly, we put some evidence about enforcement on speed and driving under the influence, and then at least a small section about general conditions. Talking about enforcement, most people think that this is a matter of the police and it is only about controlling behavior of different road users, especially motorized road users. Although this is probably one of the most time-consuming and also an ever ongoing assignment, enforcement is a lot more and involves a lot of different services and organizations. In our view, enforcement includes 4 different actions. First of all, the development of regulations. Secondly, controlling of the compliance of these rules. Third, reacting when rules are violated. At the end of the chain, there is also the need for evaluation. First of all, evaluation in the sense that the actions concerning controlling and the previewed reactions have real impact so that there is more compliance with regulations. But at the same time, an evaluation concerning the regulations on itself. Are the prescribed regulations still relevant for the actual situation and circumstances in the country? Enforcement can relate to the 3 basic components of road safety: infrastructure, vehicles, and users. In the following matrix, we can identify some of the elements for each cell without being complete. You can see that regulations are necessary to several elements of infrastructure. It has to do with the planification, the function of the roads, the speed limits, but also about regulations of the implantation of signs. In general, it's up to the Ministry of Infrastructure or the Department of Road Engineering to control the application of these rules and to react if a buildings company has done something wrong. It could be also possible that in case of an accident, a wrong application of these rules is one of the causing factors. At that moment, it's up to the Justice Department to just judge the situation and to take the necessary measures. Enforcement on vehicles. We also spoke in Model 6 about international standards of all kinds of vehicles. This includes also some regulations about import of vehicles and also on second-hand sales. Several different organizations are involved in controlling their compliance. Certainly the Ministry of Economics or Trade that is involved, and in general the Customs Service is on the field to control these regulations. Technical inspection of vehicles is also a kind of periodic enforcement activity, and the obligation to have a positive technical inspection certificate can be controlled by the police. Our focus in the rest of the session is of course on enforcement on behavior of road users. 2 aspects are important concerning the development of a good framework. First of all, the Highway Code, which describes the different rules about being in traffic, rules about priority, the place on the road and each category of road users, the meaning of different signs, what about passengers, what about loads, and of course what will be the consequence when these rules are not followed in terms of punishment. The licensing system. who can drive, with which vehicle, from which age, and what kind of education or training is needed. Of course, these frameworks has to be in accordance with several other regulations and systems. First of all, they must be in line with other regulations concerning traffic, about infrastructure, and about vehicles. Regulations of traffic violations must be in proportion with other criminal laws and sanctions. All crimes, including traffic violations, must be put in a kind of hierarchy or levels of severity. Where do you stay speeding in this crime scene? Where is drunk driving causing an injury accident? Where can you put it? Traffic rules and their sanction must also be in accordance with the general regulations on human rights. For example, in European country, every human being has a fundamental right on mobility. But this does not mean that everyone has a right to drive a car or a motorbike. This has to be earned by proving the driver's capacity and his motivation to comply with laws. One of the basic assumptions of human rights is that it also protects for dangers and violence. So what about car accidents and traffic violence? So the Highway Code has to take this fundamental right into account. Think a little bit more about that last comment and let us reflect about what that does mean in concrete. Can you imagine in which way a highway code can be based on the fundamental rights of every individual to be protected against dangers? Can you find in the highway code of your country some examples of this? So stop the video to find some of these examples. Afterwards, you go further in this session. You probably found some examples. Here I have some suggestions. In an accident, the damage must be paid by the person who caused the accident. And to define who is to blame, an independent person or organization will decide. So you have to take care of the injured people, and you have to take care of the investigation on who is responsible, who is going to pay for the damage. And if the accident was caused by a real violation, a prosecution, if there was a crime or severe violation, must be involved. In Belgium, for example, when a motorized vehicle is involved in an accident with a vulnerable road user, the insurance company of the motorized vehicle has always have to pay the medical cost for the vulnerable road users, independent on what was the cause of the accident. So it's the principle of the strong brother takes care of the weaker brother. Going back to the main subject, enforcement of road users' behavior. It is clear that in this section the police force is the main actor in the field. Controlling and monitoring traffic has as objective to make less violations, and less violation could mean less serious accidents. Elvik and Va indicated that if all road users complied with all road rules, fatalities would fall down by around 60% and injuries by 40%. In this section, we will focus on two of the most common violations and the most risky violations: speeding and driving while intoxicated. But before, a little video from your colleague.
Traffic Chief Dion Moore says bad judgment and irresponsible behavior are the root causes of most major accidents across the country, accidents which have resulted in fatalities. He's rooting for adherence to road safety practices.
One of the other things you can do is to leave early. If you know you have a function to attend to, you have to go to work. We must think of the prevalent situation. The traffic in the mornings are very busy and it takes a lot of time. You cannot leave early, leave late to reach early. You must leave early to reach early. A lot of people measure time against distance, and it is difficult. You must take into consideration the volume of traffic.
Mr. Moore stated that enforcement will continue. Based on analytical data, the traffic chief says several enforcement drives, including traffic stops for breathalyzer testing, have had a positive impact on the way drivers respect the rules of the road.
Has that played an impact in the way, people adhere to traffic rules?
Yes, one of the most significant things in traffic is the enforcement. That is what helps persons to come to grip, come to understand the need for them to practice road safety. Without enforcement, a lot of these drivers would choose to do otherwise. They choose to do all sorts of things. So enforcement is one of our priority, coupled with education as well.
The figures to date show a 28% reduction in accidents and a 25% reduction in road fatalities. So far, 55 accidents have been recorded, with 60 fatalities when compared to 76 accidents and 8 deaths in the same period last year. Javon Vicker, HGP Nightly News.
Speeding. Excessive or inadequate speed results in a higher number of accidents and a higher level of accident severity. 10 to 15% of all accidents and 30% of the accidents with a deadly injury in Europe are the direct consequence of excessive or inadequate speed. An increase of the main speed with 5 km per hour on a road leads to a rise of 50% of deadly accidents. In case of a collision between a vehicle and a vulnerable road user, the injuries of the vulnerable road user are extremely severe. A study has pointed out that for an impact of speed of 70 km per hour, the risk of a deadly injury equals to 16% for an occupant of the car and is 2 times higher, 38%, for a pedestrian. In case of acceleration from 70 km an hour to 80 km an hour, the risk doubles. Police forces have several available methods to control the speed of car drivers. You can control the speed on basis of the speedometer in their own patrol car, when they are chasing someone or when they're driving in traffic. The speed gun, also speed cameras or trajectory speed control, are possible. And of course, there's always the subjective observation, especially for inappropriate speed. Each of these methods have their own pros and cons. Speed cameras and trajectory control are automated enforcement devices. They are more effective because they are not always visible and they can be spread over a whole road network without demanding too many personnel. These automated devices can register a large number of vehicles and automatically register also the tickets.
Records from the Federal Road Safety Corps reveal that within the first half of 2015, the FCT alone recorded 648 crashes, with 107 fatal cases and injuries. The FRSC Zone 7 commanding officer attributes these unfortunate experiences to excessive speeding, leading to loss of control and dangerous driving by motorists. This, is said, informed the command to initiate the Mobile Speed Limit Control Patrol as a strategy to stem the tide.
So we had to initiate the mobile speed control strategy, which had been on, and because of this period when we know that, of course, there are more vehicles on the road, more people are traveling, and the moment you have more vehicles and more people traveling, the tendency is that people want to catch up with time, people want to speed above the limit. And so what we're doing here is to ensure that we bring back the good old days of FRSC.
Some motorists agree that the initiative by the Corps will go a long way to awaken their consciousness on the need for safety.
I thank God for the road safety. They do their normal work. They are here. They control the speed limit. At least it reached almost 1 week that I'm showing them going up and down.
The routine Mobile Speed Limit Control Patrol, steered by the Zone 7 commanding officer, covers the Sabon-Wuse to Abaji axis of the FCT. In Abuja, Justin Bem-Unyi, NTA News.
Some people said that in theory, non-automatic devices have three advantages. You get an immediate reaction. The violator is stopped and he gets immediately his ticket or a remark. At that time, the police officer can also explain why his violation could be a risky behavior. And of course, the other drivers who are passing by see that police is really reacting on violations. In Europe, Eric Goldenberg and Vey have tried to estimate the impact or the effectiveness of monitoring speed. And of course, in general, monitoring speed has a greater effect on fatal crashes than on injury crashes. For all speed enforcement methods collectively, the researchers found 29% reduction for fatal crashes and 14% reduction in injury crashes. This is obviously because high speed are a major component of fatal accidents. Injuries can already occur in accidents with lower speed impact. Well, let's talk a little bit about alcohol and illicit drugs. In a European study, on a road survey, when we test the people, we saw that 1 in 20 persons and 20 drivers test positive for alcohol, and nearly 1 in 50 drivers test positive for illicit drugs. But when we go to the hospitals and we see what injured drivers have come in as blood levels, well, we see that 30% of these injured drivers test positive for alcohol and 5% test positive for illicit drugs. In the same study, the Druid study, they tried to find an estimation of the relative risk of driving under influence of alcohol and some of the illicit drugs. And here you see in the table these different relative risk levels. You see that already a small amount of alcohol in the blood gives already an elevated risk on slightly incidence. Also, cannabis is already a slight increased risk. Cocaine and benzodiazepines and medical opioids are far more dangerous. Driving under the influence of alcohol is controlled by taking a breath test or a blood sample. It's important that these devices are well maintained, calibrated and controlled on their reliability periodically. Monitoring and testing of illicit drugs is a far more complex issue. There are a lot of different drugs with a wide variation in chemical substances that has to be detected. In general, governments and police forces will concentrate their action on the most common drugs. For European countries, that is marijuana, amphetamines and cocaine, which are the most common illicit drugs by drivers. Also in Africa, the use of cannabis and cocaine is rising. In some, especially northeastern countries, also cat chewing could be a problem. For checking drugs, you can only use saliva samples or urine samples or blood samples. In general, there are two ways to monitor drivings on the use of alcohol and illicit drugs. At random testing, that means you test all drivers who are coming by, or selective testing, only suspicious drivers. We know that at random testing is more effective and is estimated at 14% less alcohol-related accidents. Of course, the frequency of controls play a very crucial role. The best results are seen in Australia, but there 33% of all drivers undergo at least one test per year. When you come to the conclusion to say what is effective in enforcement, especially enforcement of road users' behavior, we have the following conditions. First of all, rules and regulations must be very clear and well known by the population. Police actions and enforcement activities must be seen in the first place as prevention and not only as a way to catch as many people as possible. The change of being caught must be as high as possible. This means very many controls actions, especially on dangerous places. Communications of these enforcement actions are important. In that communication, governments have to explain why and how this enforcement action took place, and as soon as possible also prove their effectiveness. Monitoring behavior must also result in a quick and fair reaction. Punishment can take different forms. It can be a fine or a withdrawal of the driver's license, But don't forget that also courses or rehabilitation programs could be effective. Enforcement must be well planned based on analysis of the road safety situation. What are the most risky behavior? Where are they most common? Are there specific times intervals when this behavior or the risk is higher? And again, enforcement is only one part of the general road safety action plan. Working on the system, all the 5 pillars, and trying to shape the behavior by users by the 3 A's, engineering, education, and enforcement, has to be continued. With these links, you find some more information about enforcement of road users' behavior. Download the PDF of this presentation from the website. I thank you very much for your attention and I wish you good luck.